Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk about something that people have been asking Xbox for a really long time, which is of course licensed IP. Basically since PlayStation put out Spider-Man in 2018, everyone's been asking Xbox, when are you guys going to have your own superhero game? When are you going to have your own Star Wars game? And so what I've done is I've taken a list of some of the most popular IP going right now. I've compared that to a list of the Xbox studios, and I figured out where I think those pieces fit together in the most exciting way. Now, of course, I realize that realistically, probably none of these games will be made, but this list is just for fun, so let's get into it. The first studio I want to talk about is the Coalition. This is probably one of Xbox's most talented teams, although people who don't like Gears of War probably don't know that, which is a real shame because they are absolute masters of the Unreal Engine. And when you consider that whatever their next game is going to be built on Unreal Engine 5, which even people who are not masters with that platform are doing amazing things with, it gets me really excited to see whatever their next project is. And when you apply that to basically an endless list of possible licensed IPs they could go for, it's a really exciting prospect. I think, however, that Coalition is probably the best suited studio in the Xbox family right now to make a superhero game. To keep it a little bit more in their wheelhouse, I would like it to be a game that focuses on sort of team dynamics. They do a great job of that with their Gears of War games. And probably something that's a little darker, grittier, and maybe something where you're not necessarily flying around. Something where you're still using guns. And so I thought the perfect application for Coalition would be the Suicide Squad. I think they would absolutely knock this out of the park. Of course, I think every game on this list would be knocked out of the park, so that really shouldn't come as a surprise. But imagine Coalition making a game where you most likely play as Deadshot. I feel like he's sort of become the de facto leader of the Suicide Squad pretty much since the New 52, if not earlier. Just leading a team of more recognizable villains, people like Harley Quinn, King Shark, Captain Boomerang, maybe a couple losers like Voltaic or Limelight or something, right? You could have a lot of fun with that, And I know that the Coalition would absolutely crush it, and I do know that we are already getting a Suicide Squad game, but something about the way that game looked just isn't doing it for me, right? There's something about King Shark jumping up a 5-story building that just doesn't quite feel right. I think they might have bitten off more than they can chew with that one, but the Coalition, I believe, would absolutely crush it. The next one I want to talk about is Rare. And of course, when I think of Rare, the first thing that comes to mind is that they are a very family-friendly studio, right? I think of games like Banjo-Kazooie or like Donkey Kong 64 or Cameo Elements of Power, right? I think of games that you would either play with a kid or give to a kid as a Christmas present. And when I combine that idea with what an amazing job they did with their Sea of Thieves Pirates of the Caribbean crossover, which if you haven't played, I highly recommend. Even if you don't like Sea of Thieves, the Pirates of the Caribbean crossover is so amazing as a standalone by itself that you should really go and give it a shot. It's really good. But when I think of all that combined, I think the most obvious answer for something that they could do would just be another Disney property. Something like Aladdin or Little Mermaid or Hercules. And I named those ones in particular because I feel like you could either cross them over with Sea of Thieves or make their own game, right? Because Sea of Thieves has that quality that you have with games like Minecraft or Fortnite, where it's sort of a loose enough structure that I feel like as long as there's the property that you're dropping into it sort of fits within the bounds, you could do just about anything. Like you could even though Aladdin takes place in a desert, you could make a desert island where you go to the Cave of Wonders and you do all of that. They could introduce flying carpets. They could, for Little Mermaid, I mean, that's obvious. There's already mermaids in the game. There's already deep diving into the ocean. Just put King Neptune's castle down there somewhere, right? Like, it would be very easy for them to cross over with these certain properties. But at the same time, I also know, of course, that Rare would do an amazing job just making a Hercules game by itself or a Little Mermaid game by itself. In that case, though, I would want them to not follow the story of the movies. Right? Those movies are classics. We've probably all seen them 100 times. I know me in particular, I watched that Hercules movie enough times on VHS as a kid to pretty much destroy the plastic of the tape. So I don't need to see that story again. But if you told it sort of a spin-off story with those characters in that same sort of mythos, I think it would be absolutely stellar and kids would eat that up. Next up is Obsidian, and it was actually hard for me to choose something for them to work on because, much like the Coalition, I feel like they are so monumentally talented that you could hand them any IP and they would make an absolute gangbuster game out of it. But I thought selfishly what I wanted the most, and I think that they would make an absolutely stellar anime game, right? Now hear me out, because it's probably not what you were thinking for them. Obsidian is the team that figured out how to make a South Park game that looks pretty much indistinguishable from the TV show. And one of the biggest things that bothers me personally about anime games right now is that they go for this 3D art style that is fine, but just doesn't feel right. It doesn't capture that essence of anime. And while obviously South Park is a much more simplistic, rudimentary form of animation than most anime these days, I feel like there are similar techniques that they could use to figure out a way to make that work. And selfishly, much like they did with South Park, where they made the first game and then the second game was taken over by another team, but they were able to use the same technology to make it still look correct. My hope is that if Obsidian could find out the technology to make anime games look like anime, then they could maybe license or just give out that technology to other teams to make anime games actually look and feel more worthwhile. Because I'm a big anime fan. I don't know if you've noticed, right? There's anime stuff all around me, right? And anime is extremely popular. Not just obviously in the Asian market, but in the West as well. You know, you look at things like One Piece or My Hero or Dragon Ball, like everyone knows what at least one of those is, right? Like everyone has probably watched at least one of those in their lives. Maybe they didn't follow it, but you've seen it. You know what it is. And Obsidian would do an amazing job with it, of course, because I know that they would be very respectful of the subject matter while also being fantastic writers. They would be able to tell their own story in that universe, right? If they did a One Piece game, they could just make their entirely own unique crew that's going on its own adventure through the Grand Line. Or let's say they did a My Hero game, they could make a completely different hero school, maybe somewhere else in Japan or even somewhere else in the world. It could be an American school. You could do Cowboy Bebop and have it just be like the continuing adventures or a different crew. You know, these anime worlds are so well fleshed out in a lot of cases that I feel like people just want to live in them and experience them. And Obsidian is really good about allowing people to do that in the worlds that they create. You know, look at Fallout New Vegas, look at The Outer Worlds. Yes, obviously those would probably play different than any anime game that they would make, but just having that fleshed out world could be really, really good. And so I think that Obsidian would make an amazing anime game. So the next studio I want to talk about is InXile. And they're sort of an interesting case because they're really only known for one style of game, that being old school CRPGs, like they do with Wasteland or Bard's Tale. But we know that going forward, they want to do games that are more in the vein of like a Fallout 3 or a Dragon Age, right? Something that's more action focused and maybe more appealing to a wider audience, but uses a lot of the same rules of those old CRPGs. And so I think that the perfect IP to bridge that gap would be Dungeons and Dragons, because most old school CRPGs use a kind of modified D&D rule set, right? Whether they show it to you or not, there's a lot of dice rolling going on behind the scenes of those games. And between that and the fact that Dungeons and Dragons has sort of seen a renaissance lately, between a lot more people playing it during the pandemic, just because it was a great way to get friend groups together when we couldn't get together otherwise, and because shows like Stranger Things, I feel like, are sort of helping to normalize it and bring it back into the zeitgeist. I think that it's time for people who are not familiar with D&D to sort of learn what it can be. It's a completely open book, no pun intended. And they could do whatever they want with it, right? If they wanted to do something that was more horror leaning, they could do a Curse of Strahd game. If they want to do something that's more adventurous, they could do Tomb of Annihilation. If they want to do something sci-fi, they could do Spelljammers. There's infinite possibilities, and it would really help them flex their writing muscles, because they're fantastic writers, although I don't think a lot of people play their games just because the old CRPG gameplay style is just not particularly popular. But D&D would be perfect for them to use because it has some of the best written villains of all time, and nobody knows who they are. Strahd von Zarovich, the Castellanterns, Xanathar, Acererak, Vecna, not the one from Stranger Things, the other one. There is infinite possibilities with D&D. Now, what I will say is that I hope that what they would do, and what anybody would do with the Dungeons & Dragons license, is just tell the story of one of the campaign books, right? You can have somebody else play through it first, like have a team play through it and then tell the story of that playthrough, or maybe modify it to make it fit better into a video game, but just don't worry about having it be exactly like D&D, because a video game is not capable of doing that, right? In D&D, you can do literally anything that you can think of and that your DM will allow, right? Where a video game has to be more restrictive just by nature of the fact that it has to physically happen in the video game, right? So just tell a really good story that takes place in one of the campaign settings, and I think you'll be golden, because that's the trap that a lot of D&D games fall into, is that they end up not looking very good or having particularly good like acting or anything like that, because there's so many different moving pieces that they're trying to account for. And I think it would be better to just not worry about all that and just tell a really good story about Strahd or about Vecna. Again, not the Stranger Things one. But InXile is perfectly suited to make that game, and I really want to play it. The next one is id Software, and they are obviously one of the best shooting studios in the world. I don't think anyone would argue with me on that one. After Doom and Doom Eternal, I think they've pretty well proved themselves. And so when I was thinking about things that they could work on, it was basically like any action movie. I tended to lean more towards the 80s. And so the one that I ended up sticking with was Aliens and Predator, right? I feel like this is going to be a really easy sell. Just imagine being a colonial marine in that universe, but it has that same level of like really visceral, hard-hitting shooter mechanics that you get from Doom. I can't imagine a single person saying that they don't want to play that. Now, obviously, if you're playing as a colonial marine, you wouldn't have that same level of like power fantasy that you get from being the Doomslayer, because colonial marines are very killable if you've seen those movies, whereas Doomslayer is basically a god beast. And that might give it sort of a different vibe that maybe some people wouldn't go with, but I think it would be absolutely excellent. I don't think I need to sell this any more than that. Then we've got Tango Gameworks, and I know that realistically Microsoft and Xbox would probably want to keep them working on something Japanese, being as how it's their only Japanese studio and they're trying to break into that marketplace. But I don't really know that many Japanese horror franchises outside of Silent Hill, but I was trying to not think of licenses that were already video games. So What I ended up sticking to was Stephen King. I went back and forth between things like It, The Stand, Dark Tower, but I think the one that for me would be the most exciting is The Mist. If you don't know, The Mist is this story about a small town American town, which is pretty much every Stephen King story if you think about it, in which a scientific facility opens a portal, all this mist comes out, and it hides these strange monsters, and it serves as a backdrop for a lot of sort of psychological horror to happen, right? And that's something that Tango Gameworks excels at, right? I mean, look at Evil Within 1 and 2. They are absolutely excellent. In particular, the second one. Evil Within 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend it. But I look at Evil Within 2, I look at The Mist, and those, to me, are such a clear connection that I couldn't get it out of my mind, right? And I mean, we're talking about Shinji Mikami, right? This is the guy who invented Resident Evil. He knows how to make a horror game. So realistically, you could probably give him pretty much any horror franchise and he would crush it. But I feel like The Mist, with its psychological horror elements, just more perfectly fits their motif. So the next thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to pull one of the Call of Duty studios off of Call of Duty and give them an exciting, fresh IP to work on. And the studio that I immediately went to, because I feel like they have the more interesting history, is Raven Software. They obviously have worked on a lot of Call of Duty games. I think they're most recently known for the Warzone modes. But historically, they've also done things like Heretic and Hexen, which I feel like that combination would make them very good at making a Stranger Things game. Now, Stranger Things is a franchise, or an IP, I should say, that I almost gave to the Coalition on this list, and I think that may have been just me connecting. There's tentacles in the Upside Down, and then the tentacles in like the newer Gears of War games, and just like getting that stuck in my head. So I don't know if I was just sort of spinning around on that, but I ended up giving it to Raven Software because the thing that most drew me to it was the idea of a Stranger Things game that had the fidelity and the voice acting talent and the mocap prowess of a Call of Duty game. Now, obviously, I feel like you would want to pull it back and do a third-person thing, and it probably wouldn't be strictly a shooter. You know, when I think of Stranger Things, I do think a lot more of people fighting with, like, baseball bats or trash can lids with nails put through it, right? Like, I don't think it would be strictly a shooter, but I also feel like Raven Software wouldn't probably be wanting to get away from Call of Duty as much as possible at this point. So I think it would be an absolutely stellar thing for them. And Stranger Things, of course, would sell like crazy. It's one of the hottest IPs going right now. I mean, it got Kate Bush up to #1 on Spotify for like the last month. So there's definitely desire for this game. And if Raven could put together a game that was as stunning as most Call of Duty games are, but took place in the Stranger Things universe, I think we're talking about a Game of the Year level game. Then we've got one that it might be the one that I'm most excited for on this list, honestly, this list of games that won't exist. And it's 343 Industries, right? I feel like they very desperately need to get off of the Halo franchise. Not necessarily because they've been doing a bad job, although I understand surely that a lot of people feel that way, and I understand why they would. I feel like they're just stuck in this Halo rut. You know, 343 has only ever done Halo games. They've never really been allowed to stretch their legs because the Halo fan base is very restrictive on what you are and are not allowed to do with Halo for some reason, which in my opinion, they should just do whatever they want anyway and just let the fan base be damned. Because they're a new studio and they should do what feels best for them. But even if they just got off of Halo for a while and they were able to stretch their legs and find out some new things and then come back to Halo, I think it would be better, not just for them, but for Halo in the long run, for them to be able to sort of learn and grow. And with that in mind, I obviously wanted to keep it in a shooter genre, but I wanted to push it as far out of that sci-fi Halo universe as possible. And so the thing that I came to, and that I would be really excited to have a game of, is the G.C.P.D, the Gotham City Police Department. These are just regular cops in Gotham trying to protect and serve in a world in which police are not as capable of doing their job as they are in our world, right? If you haven't read it, there's a run of GCPD comic books that are absolutely amazing. They're honestly some of my favorite stories in comic books recently. Well, actually, I don't know if they're recently. I've read them recently, and it's just this fantastic story of these basically just regular people with a regular tool set trying to do things like take on the Joker and his thugs, or break into the Iceberg Lounge and catch the Penguin, or even just survive a fight with Killer Croc, right? Like, these are things that for Batman are everyday activities. But if you're just a regular person with a bulletproof vest and a pistol, this is a monumental task, right? And I think that would be a really exciting game to tell, right? Now, to keep it more in Halo terms, I do feel like it would obviously feel more in the vein of like in ODST, where, you know, you're not a Spartan, you're just a guy. That power fantasy is not there. You have to be clever, you have to outthink things, you have to be strategic. And I think that 343 could do an amazing job with it. Mechanically, they are excellent, right? You look at the Halo games, even the newer ones that people are not as fond of, and those games play extremely well. You look at Halo Infinite, the shooting feels amazing, the movement feels amazing. My only concern for this property would be that I don't think 343 has particularly great writing chops, and that might be a little bit of an issue here. But it's a game that I absolutely want to play. I think that a GCPD game could do gangbusters in this industry. Then we come to the initiative. Now, this is one that I feel like is going to take a little bit more pitching than pretty much anything else on this list, so bear with me. But I would like for the initiative to make a Game of Thrones game. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, why would you want to make a Game of Thrones game? That last season was terrible. And look, yes, that last season wasn't as good as the rest, but if you look at the prior, 6 seasons, it was a absolute phenomenon. I feel like 7 or 8 bad episodes are just not capable of wiping that away. I mean, every single person was watching that show. It was massive, right? So don't tell me that Game of Thrones is not a franchise or an IP that would do well in the gaming space, okay? Let's just get that out of the way right off the top. Secondly, in terms of what this game would be, the initiative is made up of people from Rockstar, from Naughty Dog, from Insomniac, from the top teams of the video game industry. And so I would expect top level quality from them. What I would like for this game to be is an open world game in the vein of a Grand Theft Auto, where you are able to explore Westeros. Because I feel like that's what people want more than anything. People want to be able to walk through the streets of King's Landing. They want to be able to go and explore Winterfell. They want to be able to go and have a fight with the Sand Snakes in Dorne, right? This is a world that is very deep and very well thought out, and people just want to feel like they're a part of it. So the open world aspect of it is the most important aspect to get right. And Grand Theft Auto, while I feel like a lot of people who like open world games, like a Fallout or a more Bethesda style, might not necessarily love a Grand Theft Auto, there's no arguing that look at Red Dead, right? They are capable of making extremely dense, extremely high fidelity open worlds. And if they could do that with Westeros, it would be amazing, right? Now, beyond that, I would say, again, don't have it follow the story of the show, because we know the story of the show already, and a lot of people really did not like how that story ended. So just tell a brand new story, right? Tell it at a different time period, tell it in an alternate situation, right? Or have it start in the same place, but just have it be a game that is heavily focused on choice and consequence, right? Maybe you play the lord of a minor house and you have to make the decision of whether or not you want to play the Game of Thrones and try to become the king yourself, or if you want to support another lord in becoming the king, right? If you want to support Jon Snow, or if you want to support the Lannisters or whatever, right? Make it a game about a heavy RPG about choice and consequence, and get those Naughty Dog guys in there. Get them making the decisions about sort of the blocking of the cutscenes. Have them tell this narrative with that mocap knowledge, with that voice acting, knowledge, that direction. Because Naughty Dog games tell stories in ways that other people just don't. And if you could combine with any IP, if you can combine Rockstar level open world with Naughty Dog level narrative and acting, you could be telling a story about a man running a hot dog stand and it would be amazing, right? But you take and you put that in Game of Thrones, one of the most popular IP of all time, despite that last season, despite the fact that George R. R. Martin hasn't put out a book in ridiculously long and may never actually finish the franchise, that would be one of the most monumentally huge video games of all time. If Xbox could make that game and have it be exclusive to the platform, that's going to be game over, right? That is the game of the generation, no question. And last but certainly not least, we have Arkane. Now, Arkane is known for making these immersive sim style games, typically in a gameplay style where you have a weapon in one hand and a power in the other, and they make those games extremely well. And when I think of that combat scenario, the number one thing that comes to mind is Star Wars, right? Imagine an Arkane immersive sim where you've got a lightsaber or a blaster in one hand and your force powers in the other. Do I need to say anything else, right? Have it be that. Or if you don't want to go the direction of having it be a force sensitive person, because Jedi don't typically use blasters and they do tend to focus more on like shooting than melee, then maybe instead you're a Mandalorian, a bounty hunter, and you've got a gun in one hand and you've got like the grappling hook or the flamethrower or the, what does he call it in the show, the like little missiles, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different options that they could take with Star Wars in an Arkane gameplay style. And I feel like I wanted to make sure to give Arkane an especially popular and especially big IP, because Arkane games have a tendency of underperforming in terms of sales, despite the fact that they are highly critically acclaimed. So I feel like if you gave Arkane an IP like Star Wars, people would come to that game, realize, oh wow, this is an amazing studio that does fantastic things. And then when they come out with Prey 2, maybe it'll do better than Prey. It'll do as well as Prey 1 should have performed, because that game's amazing. Or if they go back to Dishonored and they make another Dishonored game, people will be more interested in it on a widespread basis, because they'll be like, that's that team that did that Star Wars game that was amazing, right? Once you sort of get into people's homes with Star Wars, I feel like you will then have an easier time with your own IP down the road. Or if they just wanted to keep making the Star Wars games, I mean, I'm sure it would be good. They're Arkane, so maybe just make an entire franchise out of that. But regardless, I think Arkane would be very good for Star Wars, and Star Wars would be very good for Arkane. It's this perfect symbiotic relationship that I'm honestly kind of surprised no one has come up with before, or at least not that I've heard. So those are the best licensed IP pairings that I could come up for Xbox. And those ones are free, Xbox. If you're watching this, I'm sure you're not. But if you were, hey, there's some free ideas for you. Do you guys have any ideas of your own? Tell me about them in the comments down below. I'm sure that there's a lot of IP studio pairing ideas floating around, and some of them are probably even really good, and I'd love to hear about them. I do apologize for not having a video out the last week or two. Full disclosure, I lost my job, and so I've been sort of struggling to apply for other jobs, and I had things that were more financially important for me to worry about than making a YouTube video. Because unfortunately, while I do love doing this, it doesn't pay my bills. At least not yet. I don't know. Maybe subscribe, share it with a friend, like the video if you like it. But it's been a tough time. So I do appreciate all of your support. It really does mean a lot to me. And one bright note is, if you haven't heard, I am now a full-time panelist over at the Xbox Factor podcast with Mr. Boomstick XL over on the Double Barrel Gaming channel. It goes live every Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. and I'm going to be on that every week. So if you, for whatever reason, are not getting enough content at this channel, because unfortunately I have missed a couple weeks and have not been as consistent as I would like to be for a number of reasons lately, there's always more content of me giving my video game opinions over there. So please come by and check us out. I'd love to see you there. Just drop a comment saying like, "Hey, I came from Daniel McGee's channel," and then I'll know that you're one of mine. Anyway, sorry for the ramble at the end here. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you around.